At my office desk, he thought he could corner me, leaning too close, blocking my way out, his shadow stretching over my computer screen. For a moment I froze, my fingers stiff on the keyboard, my breath caught in my chest. His voice was low, smug, like he knew I wouldn't dare push back. But the truth is, he had no idea what I was about to do. You ever have one of those moments where time slows down and you're suddenly aware of every tiny detail? The hum of the fluorescent lights above, the faint smell of burnt coffee from the break room, the sound of a printer still spitting out pages down the hall. That's what it felt like for me in that moment, trapped between his presence and the silence of an office that should have been empty. But maybe I need to back up, because this didn't just happen out of nowhere. The truth is, the tension had been building for weeks. I'd been working late nights, grinding through projects no one else wanted, proving myself again and again in a company that seemed to only notice me when something went wrong. My desk was tucked away in the corner of the open-plan office, right under an AC vent that made me shiver even in summer. The walls were lined with whiteboards covered in deadlines, sticky notes piled on my monitor, and an inbox so full it felt like it could bury me alive. I wasn't new. I'd been at the company 3 years, but somehow I was still treated like the quiet girl who just got lucky to have a desk. People would pass me in the hall without remembering my name. They'd talk over me in meetings, take credit for my ideas, laugh when I worked through lunch. And I swallowed it, because that's what you do when you need the paycheck, when you think keeping your head down is the safest way forward. Then there was him. Let's just call him Marcus. He wasn't my boss, but he acted like he was. Loud in meetings, charming with the higher-ups, always talking about his big wins, even when I knew half of them weren't his. He had that way of standing too close, of lowering his voice so only you could hear, of making comments that could pass as jokes, if you were too scared to call them what they really were. Most of the time, I brushed it off. I laughed awkwardly, shifted my chair, found excuses to leave the room. But inside, I hated it. I hated how he made me feel small in a space where I'd worked so hard to belong. That Friday night, the office was nearly empty. It was past 7. Most people had gone home to their families, their dinners, their weekends. I was still there, of course, hunched over spreadsheets, the glow of the monitor burning into my tired eyes. My phone buzzed with a text from my friend. "Still at work? You need to stop killing yourself there." I sighed, ignoring it, telling myself I'd leave after just one more email. And that's when Marcus appeared. He must have been lingering, waiting for the right moment. I didn't hear him walk up, but suddenly he was there, leaning against the side of my desk, his cologne heavy in the air, his eyes fixed on me like I was prey he'd finally cornered. "Still here?" he said, his tone dripping with fake concern. "You work too hard. Maybe you need a little distraction." My stomach knotted, but I forced a polite smile, the kind you wear when you're trapped. "Just finishing up." I tried to keep my eyes on the screen, hoping he'd take the hint. He didn't. He leaned closer, one hand on the back of my chair, his body blocking the only way out. His shadow fell over me, his voice low enough that no one else could hear, though no one else was even there. "You know," he murmured, "you don't have to be so serious all the time. People would notice you more if you loosened up. I could help with that." My heart pounded, heat rushing to my face. I wanted to push him back, wanted to scream, but my body betrayed me. For a second, I froze, completely. My hands tightened on the edge of the desk, my throat dry, my mind racing through 1,000 outcomes, none of them safe. He smirked, thinking he had me right where he wanted me. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't see, was that I had already decided weeks ago that I wouldn't let this go on forever. I had been planning, quietly, carefully, waiting for the right moment. And tonight was going to be different, because Marcus thought he had cornered me, but he had no idea what was coming next. His hand rested on the back of my chair, his body angled so close that the glow from my monitor reflected off his shirt buttons, and I could feel the weight of his presence pressing me in. My chair was boxed in, my exit blocked, and every instinct in me screamed to move, to push, to shout, but my body stayed locked for that one unbearable second. He leaned down, his voice so low I could feel the breath against my ear. "You really should let someone take care of you once in a while," he said, like it was some kind of favor. My skin crawled, my heart hammering against my ribs, and I thought, not tonight, not anymore. What Marcus didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this. Every late night at the office, every uneasy laugh I'd given him in the past, every moment I'd swallowed the words I wanted to say, they had all built to this. I had stopped being the girl who froze weeks ago. The moment I realized he'd never stop unless someone made him. So I started paying attention. I started recording. Our company had given us laptops with built-in meeting software, and most people never bothered with it unless they were on Zoom. But me? I had learned how to use it differently. A background recorder, always running, always saving, every sound near my desk captured with a single shortcut key. I never told anyone. I just waited, patient, because I knew Marcus. He thrived on empty hallways, late nights, the quiet corners where no one else could see. And eventually, he'd walk straight into the trap he'd set for himself. Tonight was that night. I glanced up at him, forcing my expression to stay neutral, even as anger bubbled inside me. I really need to finish this report, I said softly, hoping my voice didn't give away the adrenaline flooding through me. He smirked like he'd won. Reports can wait, he said, his tone sharp, laced with arrogance. Opportunities can't. That line alone was enough to make bile rise in my throat. But I steadied my hand and, as if I were just reaching for my mouse, I slid my fingers across the keyboard and tapped the shortcut key I'd practiced a dozen times before. A tiny red dot appeared in the corner of my screen, invisible to him, but to me it was everything. The recorder was live. Every word, every breath, every move from this point forward, it was all being saved. He thought I was still frozen, that I was still the quiet girl who didn't push back. He had no idea the game had already shifted. Marcus, I said, keeping my voice calm, almost gentle. Do you even hear yourself right now? He chuckled, straightening just enough to look down at me with mock surprise. What? I'm just being nice. Don't take it so seriously. His hand slid from the back of my chair to the desk, his fingers inches from mine. I pulled my hand back, slowly, deliberately, and for the first time, I didn't hide the disgust in my eyes. His smirk faltered just slightly, but he covered it quickly, leaning in again. You don't have to act tough with me. I know you. That was his mistake. Because he didn't know me. Not really. Not the version of me sitting there that night, holding every ounce of evidence I needed right in my hands. I let the silence stretch, let him think he was still in control, while inside I felt the fear turning into something sharper. Resolve. The office around us was quiet, too quiet, every detail burning into my memory. The hum of the AC vent above, the flickering light in the corner, the clock on the wall ticking toward 8 p.m. A space that had always felt like a prison was suddenly shifting into something else. A stage. And he had no idea he was performing for an audience bigger than just me. You should leave, I said finally, my voice steadier than I felt. He tilted his head, mocking. Or what? His arrogance was almost laughable now, because the truth was already captured, sealed in a file I could share with a single click. I stared back at him, letting him sit in his own question, letting him think I was bluffing. But I wasn't bluffing. Not tonight. My palms were sweating, my pulse racing, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had the upper hand. And as he shifted his weight, leaning even closer, I knew the moment of reckoning was coming faster than either of us expected. He thought he had cornered me. What he didn't see, what he couldn't see, was that the walls were already closing in on him instead. He shifted his weight and leaned in closer. His arm braced against the desk, like he was trying to cage me in. And for the first time all night, I felt the air shift from uncomfortable to dangerous. His cologne was overpowering, the heat of his body too close, and every nerve in me screamed to push him away. But instead, I sat still, my hands flat on the desk, my face unreadable. The recorder was already running, and every second that ticked by felt like another nail in his coffin. He smirked, lowering his voice again. You know, people think you're quiet because you're shy. But I know better. You're just waiting for someone to bring you out of your shell. My stomach churned, but I forced myself to hold his gaze. That threw him off more than I expected. He was used to me looking away, used to my nervous laugh, used to me shrinking into the background. But now I wasn't looking away. I wasn't laughing. I was staring right back at him, and I could see the flicker of confusion in his eyes. "What's the matter?" he asked, his tone half mocking, half challenging. I let the silence hang for a moment, just long enough for him to start doubting himself. Then I said quietly, "Marcus, do you even realize how pathetic you sound?" His smirk faltered, his brows knitting together as if he couldn't believe I had spoken to him like that. He straightened a little, trying to recover, trying to puff himself up. "Excuse me?" I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms, and for the first time that night I felt the fear in my chest loosen. "You think cornering me makes you powerful? You think standing here, leaning over my desk, whispering garbage in my ear makes you a man? It makes you look small, really small." His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing. He wasn't laughing now. He glanced toward the door, as if checking to see if anyone else was around, but the office was silent except for us and the faint hum of the AC. "Careful," he said, his voice low, almost a growl. "You don't want to make me your enemy." That's when I smiled. Just a small one, barely lifting the corner of my mouth, but it was enough to make him blink. "You already are," I said softly. He took a step back, clearly rattled, but his pride wouldn't let him retreat completely. "You think anyone's going to believe you?" he snapped. "You think you can turn this around on me? I've been here longer than you. Everyone knows me. They trust me." I tilted my head, letting the calm sink into my words even though my heart was racing. Then I guess it's lucky for me that I don't need them to take my word for it. His face shifted instantly, the confidence draining as he realized I was holding something he couldn't see. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. I tapped the corner of my laptop screen where the tiny red dot glowed faintly. He followed my gesture, squinting, and when he understood, his whole body stiffened. "You," he started, but I cut him off. "Every word, Marcus. Every single thing you've said tonight. It's all here. And you're right about one thing. People do think I'm quiet. They think I keep my head down. But quiet doesn't mean weak. It means I've been watching, listening, waiting." His mouth opened and closed like he wanted to argue, but nothing came out. The arrogance that had wrapped around him like armor was gone, replaced with something raw, fear. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing a half step like an animal cornered. "Delete it," he said finally, his tone sharp, desperate. "Delete it right now." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the desk, meeting his panic with calm. "No." That one word hung between us heavier than anything else I'd said. His breathing quickened, his fists clenching at his sides, and for a moment I thought he might lash out. But then he hesitated, his eyes darting toward the hallway again, and I realized something important. He wasn't in control anymore. I was. The recorder was proof, my voice was steady, and for the first time, he was the one frozen. My pulse pounded, but I kept my face steady, kept my voice low enough that he had to lean in again to hear. "Walk away, Marcus, because if you don't, this file is going to places you can't control. HR, legal, maybe even further. Your choice." He stared at me, his jaw working, his pride battling his fear. And in that silence, in that charged moment, I knew the night wasn't over. Because men like Marcus don't just back down. They scheme, they scramble, they find other ways to claw their power back. And I could see it in his eyes. He wasn't finished. Not yet. Marcus stood there, his fists clenching and unclenching at his sides, his eyes darting between me and the glowing red dot on my screen, and I could see his brain scrambling for a way out. The arrogance that had carried him into this moment was cracking, but underneath it was something worse. Desperation. "You think this is going to save you?" he hissed, his voice low but sharp. "You think one little file is enough to take me down? You don't understand how this place works. They'll believe me over you every time." My chest tightened, but I kept my face calm, my voice steady. "Maybe before, but not anymore. Not after this." He laughed, but it was hollow, forced. Nothing like the smug chuckle he'd thrown out earlier. "You're bluffing," he said, stepping closer again. "You don't have the guts. You'll delete it because you're scared of what happens if you don't." His words hit, but they didn't stick, because I wasn't the same girl who froze at her desk, praying he would go away. I leaned back, crossing my arms, my eyes never leaving his. "I'm not bluffing, Marcus. I already sent it." That was a lie, But the best kind of lie, because his face drained of color instantly. His breath caught, and for a moment he looked like a man watching his world crumble. "You what?" he stammered. I nodded slowly, keeping my expression unreadable. "Auto backup. Cloud storage. You can break my laptop right now and it won't matter. It's not just here anymore." He turned toward the computer like he was tempted to slam it shut, rip it from the desk, but the truth of what I'd said rooted him in place. He knew technology well enough to realize I could be telling the truth. He also knew he couldn't risk calling my bluff. He dragged a hand over his face, his voice rising now, the control slipping from his grip. "Do you know what you're doing? You're ruining yourself. You think the higher-ups are going to thank you for this? No, they'll cut you loose to keep the peace. And me? I'll be fine. I always am." My heart pounded, because part of me knew he wasn't entirely wrong. Companies like ours didn't like scandal. They didn't like conflict. They liked sweeping things under the rug. But that's exactly why I had prepared. That's exactly why I had planned further than just HR. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor, the sound loud in the silent office. "You're right, Marcus," I said softly. "They might try to bury it, but what they can't bury is proof outside these walls." His eyes snapped to mine, wide, panicked. "What do you mean?" I let a small smile play at the edge of my lips. "Do you really think I'd risk everything on one channel? I have options, more than you think." The truth was, I'd been keeping a journal, documenting every uncomfortable comment, every too-close encounter, every moment that made my skin crawl. And just last week, I'd shared it with someone I trusted outside the company. I didn't say that out loud, but the certainty in my voice made him believe it. He stepped back, shaking his head, his composure unraveling. "You're insane," he muttered. "You're actually insane." I tilted my head, studying him like he had studied me so many times before. "No, Marcus, I'm careful. That's what you never saw. You thought I was weak because I was quiet. But quiet doesn't mean powerless." He opened his mouth again, but this time the words didn't come. He was frozen, the same way I had been earlier, except now the fear was his. And I let the silence stretch, savoring the reversal. Then he tried one last tactic. His voice softened, false warmth dripping from it like poison. "Look, we don't have to make this a big deal," he said. "Delete it. Pretend this never happened. I'll stay out of your way, I promise. You'll never hear from me again." I almost laughed. The man who had cornered me, who had smirked and whispered like he owned the room, was now begging. "It's already a big deal," I said simply. "And it's not up to you anymore." His mask cracked fully then, rage flashing in his eyes, his hands trembling. "You'll regret this," he spat, his voice shaking. "You don't know what kind of enemies you're making." I stood tall, my voice calm, final. "Maybe, but tonight, Marcus, you're the one who should be scared." The office was silent except for the ticking clock on the wall, each second louder than the last, and in that charged moment I realized something. The tables had turned completely. He thought he had cornered me, but the truth was, he was the one trapped now, with nowhere to run and no way to undo what was already in motion. The silence between us stretched, heavy and suffocating, and I could almost hear the panic pounding in his chest. Marcus wasn't smirking anymore. He wasn't leaning in with false confidence. He was cornered, and he knew it. I didn't have to say another word. The truth was already written on his face. But I did, because after all those weeks of swallowing my anger, of freezing when I should have spoken, I wasn't about to let this moment slip away. "You think I'm scared of you?" I asked softly, my voice cutting through the stillness of the office. "You've built your whole reputation on making people afraid, on keeping them quiet, but you picked the wrong person this time." His jaw clenched, his eyes darting toward the hallway like maybe someone else would swoop in to save him. No one did. The office was empty except for us, and the truth buzzing on my laptop. He muttered something under his breath, curses aimed at me, at the company, at the whole situation, but it didn't matter. His words meant nothing now, because I had proof. I straightened, my hands no longer trembling, and calmly gathered my things, my notebook, my phone, my laptop with the blinking red dot. "Where are you going?" he snapped, his voice cracking. I looked at him one last time, steady and unflinching. "To make sure you'll never do this to anyone else again." His face twisted, a mixture of rage and fear, but he didn't move. He couldn't. The fight was gone from him, replaced with the reality that his power had finally slipped through his fingers. I walked out of that office with my head held higher than it had been in months, my footsteps echoing in the quiet hallway. By Monday morning, everything had changed. HR called me in first thing, their faces pale as I placed the file on the desk and pressed play. The room filled with Marcus's voice, his mocking tone, his words dripping with arrogance and entitlement. The silence from the HR team was deafening. When the recording ended, no one looked at me the same way again. By noon, Marcus's office was empty, his desk cleared out, his name wiped from the directory. Whispers ran through the building, stories spilling from people who had stayed quiet for too long. Turns out I wasn't the only one. Others had felt his hand on their shoulder, his voice in their ear, his presence behind them when they worked late. But they had been too afraid to speak. Now they didn't have to be afraid anymore. The proof had spoken for all of us. I wish I could tell you I felt triumphant, that I celebrated, that I danced in the glow of victory. The truth? I felt tired, bone-deep tired, like I had been carrying the weight of silence for too long and finally put it down. My friends texted me, some with congratulations, some with shock, and a few with stories of their own. My brother called that night, his voice steady, proud. "You did it," he said simply. And maybe he was right. Maybe I had. But as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I thought about all the times I had frozen, all the moments I had laughed when I wanted to scream, all the people who still walked into their offices every day carrying the same fear I once carried. Marcus was gone, but he wasn't the only one out there. Not by a long shot. And that's when I realized this wasn't just my story. It was bigger than me. It was about every person who's ever been cornered at their desk, every person who's ever felt trapped in silence. The next day, when people whispered in the hallway and glanced at me with something like respect, I didn't shrink back. I met their eyes. I walked taller, because if there was one thing Marcus taught me, it was this. Power doesn't come from being loud or intimidating or cornering people until they break. Real power comes from speaking when it matters most, from refusing to stay silent even when your voice shakes. So when I sit at my desk now, when I hear the hum of the AC or the chatter of coworkers, I remind myself of that night, the night he thought he had me trapped, the night I found my voice, the night I proved that quiet doesn't mean weak. And trust me, Marcus never saw it coming.